Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Sarah Chaudhry. I'm a junior studying film production and women's studies at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the Park side and JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. The director of the Institute of Politics, Seti Warren, will kick off tonight's program. Seti Warren is the director of the Institute of Politics and adjunct lecturer in public policy at Harvard Kennedy School. He previously served as mayor of Newton, Massachusetts from 2010 to 2018 and was the first African American to be a popularly elected mayor in Massachusetts. Warren has had an extensive career in public service and politics at the state and national levels. Prior to running for mayor, Warren completed a year-long tour of duty in Iraq as a Navy intelligence specialist. Please join me in welcoming IOP Director Seti Warren to the stage.
Well, good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? This is going to be an awesome evening. The first thing I want to do is welcome our new dean here. He started in July, Jeremy Weinstein. Please give him a warm welcome here at the Kennedy School. I know he's going to be a terrific leader for us. And Dean, I just want you to know this is pretty much the typical forum every single night. 600 people, this is what we do, okay? That's the normal thing. Look, it's great to be with you this evening on what may be the most consequential event of the 2024 presidential campaign. I'd also like to welcome you to the first week of our 2024 forum season. Before I offer just a very few comments, I want to take just a moment to thank the people that make these amazing events happen over the course of our semester. Thanks to the facilities team for what they do to construct our space, Securitas and HUPD for keeping us secure, media services, the team for a wonderful production, the IOP Undergraduate Student Forum Committee, and their leaders, Tenzin and Kirti, and our terrific forum staff led by Aaron Goldman and Dejanay Miller. And finally, last but not least, and then we'll give a round of applause for everyone, I do want to just acknowledge Martha Stewart, not the Martha Stewart you think of on television, but the real Martha Stewart, who actually is our official photographer. She records and photographs records of living history every night in the forum. Please give these amazing people a round of applause. So the Institute of Politics was founded in 1966. In 1963, President Kennedy's bold idea in creating a first-of-its-kind IOP was to inspire young people to get into public service and politics. In 2024, we believe deeply in President Kennedy's vision more than ever. He provided examples on how to lead politically, and we can learn from it. One of the elements of political leadership is building the capacity to have candid, constructive conversations with those we disagree with. The Kennedy School has embarked on an effort to strengthen the ability of our students, staff, and faculty to have candid and constructive conversations across difference. We are proud to co-sponsor programming that brings together people and model these conversations with guests and one another. Tonight's event is an important part of that effort. We have a fantastic lineup of pre-debate guests you'll hear from. They are people who have served at the highest levels of public service, government, politics, and journalism. The great news is that many of them you're going to hear from are actually our 2024 fall class of IOP fellows, and they are fabulous, and we are lucky to have them. Please welcome them into the forum as well. Before we start the program, I'd like to address all of you directly. We know this is going to be a highly contentious sprint towards the finish to the election. This evening, we know what we see and hear on the screen may be as well. I ask that we not allow this to be a part of our space this evening. We can disagree, but not be disagreeable with one another. Now let's go on to our guests. I'm going to introduce Eugene Scott, who will bring our guest on to the stage as we go through our two panels this evening. Eugene is a journalist who has worked at Axios, The Washington Post, and CNN. He's a graduate of HKS, and most importantly, he is a 2024 IOP Fall Fellow. Please welcome Eugene Scott to the stage.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me? I know you can now. Awesome. It is a pleasure and a privilege to have you all with us this evening. I am well aware you could be watching pre-debate coverage anywhere else. It's not lost on us that you chose to be here with us. And so we believe that our programming is superior. It's live, it's interesting, and there's food and snacks that you'll have access to as well. But we want to get this going, and we look forward to hopefully getting some questions depending on how timing works. But right now, I just want to introduce to you our first three panelists. We have Asa Hutchinson, who served in Congress and then as governor of Arkansas prior to running for the 2024 Republican nomination for president. We have Della Volpe. He's the director of polling here at the Institute of Politics and author of Fight: How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. And lastly, this first go-around, we have Alejandra Castillo, who has served in 3 presidential administrations, most recently leading the Economic Development Administration between August 2021 and 2024. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Awesome. How are you all doing so far?
Terrific.
Beautiful.
Great, great.
Beautiful room. Look at all these
It's
people.
awesome. They're all the way up there.
I see that. I see that.
It's great. So I want to start with the governor. You being the only person on this panel who's actually debated Donald Trump.
You saw how that came out.
It came out with you being here with us. So that's pretty awesome. What would you say that you wish you knew going into a debate that you didn't know that you know now?
Well, I mean, first of all, the debate that I had, we had 12 million people watching it, which was the highest number of primary voters of all the debates. But this debate tonight will probably be 50 million or more, highly watched. And so the pressure on the candidates is extraordinary. Now, Donald Trump's handled pressure and Kamala Harris as well. So they'll be well prepared, worried about them being over prepared. I think from the candidate standpoint, participating in the debate, you need to really calm your mind going in there. And you can be prepared, but to me, what you've got to, a little bit of preparation, but also it is just who you are. And that is the spontaneous moments in a debate. And you think, I want to write a book someday about answers that have cost people the presidency of the United States. And it's a pretty interesting tale from, Jimmy Carter talking serious policy about nuclear proliferation and how he had that conversation with his 12-year-old daughter. And then it's not immediate after the debate as to what are those great moments. And it takes sometimes a couple days for the media to center in on a moment. And so as a candidate, that's what you're concentrating on. It's the policy, substance, but it's all about style. And you've got to have your right strategy in terms of aggressiveness on the opponent. Donald Trump, to me, is in a very difficult position because he is who he is, and it's hard to constrain himself. But yet, if he becomes boorish, that's going to hurt him and reaffirm the gender gap that is existing out there. Kamala, to me, because she is not as known and defined as Donald Trump. She has the opportunity to define herself in a better way tonight. So the opportunity, I think, is on her side to do very, very well, or to have a gaffe, and that's what Donald Trump will be waiting for. He will pounce whenever there is an error or an opening for him to jump in.
Indeed. John, we know you are one of the foremost experts on polling youth, and there's been so much attention on what young voters are going to do in this race. We know historically young voters lean towards the Democratic nominee, but Trump's strategy has been to nip away at that, especially when it comes to young men. From what you've collected most recently, what are some of the issues you know that young voters are probably going to be looking to hear about tonight?
So, excuse me, well, just to set the stage just a little bit, I think Donald Trump would still be president today if not for younger voters. They played a critical role in 2020, and it's consistent with the polling today, which shows as divided as America is, one of the most significant divides is a generational divide. We're divided 50-50, but it may be more accurate to appreciate the fact that Donald Trump wins voters over the age of 50, and Kamala Harris is winning voters under the age of 50,
sure.
Specifically voters under the age of 30. But they're not where they were 4 years ago. The magic number generally for a Democrat to feel comfortable winning the Electoral College is the youth vote should be at close to 60%, right? She's in the mid-50s now. There is a significant number of people, according to the New York Times poll of the weekend, who want to hear more from her. 52%, I think, of young people want to hear her story. They want to hear her vision for America and to connect their values with her values. So I think it's as much about character, her story, someone that they can feel comfortable with connecting with, because let's face it, most young voters know that the policies of the Democrats are generally more aligned with their values, but they need to feel comfortable that she can execute. She's got strength, she's got vision, and she's got a plan.
Awesome. Alejandro, we know that you've worked in economic development for several administrations, and we know that the economy is often the main issue that voters list. The economy's stupid has become a phrase that most people are familiar with. From your work, have you seen there be an issue related to the economy, to economic development, that gets lost in the conversation that because people think about housing, they think about maybe childcare. Is there something else?
Yeah. So before I answer, Governor, please write that book, because I
Yeah,
definitely want to buy that one. So let me set the stage out again as well. One of the things that we Democrats don't do very well is telling our story, particularly stories of success. And in the last 3 years, my agency, or the agency I was with most recently, we pushed out over $8 billion into communities, the most distressed communities in this country, communities that have been left behind or have been—
not just urban communities.
And exactly, not just urban communities. We're talking about urban, suburban, rural, indigenous communities. That story has been lost. And I would also submit to you that not only have we made those investments in terms of distressed communities, but we've also made investments to set the stage for the future, industries of the future. I think she's going to have a hard time telling that story because it hasn't really sunk in the consciousness. The stories that have sunk in are the day-to-day stories. How much does it cost to go to the supermarket? Do you get, with $100, are you getting more today than you had before? She has to speak about that because that's real. That's the everyday. And Americans want to know that she is connected, that she feels their pain, not to quote a tired Clinton phrase, being able to feel their pain and to walk in their shoes. It's that empathy that was mentioned before. So it is about values, the empathy, but also about that vision. And what is she going to do in terms of that vision? And she needs to respond and mention to Trump, tell us your vision, because he talks about ideas that are all discombobulated without a true understanding of how government works. And I will tell you, I came back to commerce after serving in the Obama administration, and the structure of government was truly decimated. The talent, the people who left, we need to understand that it's one thing to run for president, it's another thing to govern, and we heard that from from SETI at the beginning. So there's a lot that she's going to have to acknowledge, and that is that Americans want to know, how are we going to continue to improve the economy?
I'd love to hear from any or all of you here. Are you all surprised that we are here? I mean, when we applied for this program, there were two very different nominees. I'm still very surprised that this debate is happening. Having covered the Trump administration, anything can and cannot happen within a matter of hours. Are you all surprised we're here? And if not, or maybe even if you are, can you share why?
Well, I've said from the very beginning that this is the most unpredictable political year in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I think it's proving to be that every day, and I expect more surprises as we go along. And so, I think the big surprise from my standpoint is not that we have, Kamala Harris there instead of President Biden, but the biggest surprise is how quickly she was able to unite the Democratic Party and get a pre-convention bounce. And that has really made it difficult on Donald Trump to get his sea legs under him again. He was focused in one direction, and he hasn't figured out how to handle Kamala Harris yet. And so in some ways, I'm very surprised by it, but this is the most unpredictable political year. Tonight might be another surprise.
Sure, or two.
I'm not surprised that Kamala Harris is doing as well as she's doing. I had the privilege of watching her closely over the last couple of years, and she has evolved, I think, in dramatic ways, finding her voice. Oftentimes, I think it's generally on election night when a candidate loses that they say, where was that? Where was that speech? They finally found their voice. I think she found it a year or 18 months into the administration. I think her efforts in Tennessee, but more specifically, her college tour.
Right.
And it wasn't a series of lectures, it was a series of listening sessions. School after school, some historically black colleges, some community colleges, some large state universities. Again, it wasn't lecturing, it was audiences like this where she sat and she took and she listened, and I think she internalized so well the concerns of a generation of people who feel like every single day they're losing basic rights, the right to clean air and clean water, the right to a public education, quality public education, regardless of where you live, and the right to feel safe in public venues and in private venues. And I think she has channeled that quite well, and she's expanded that. And I think she's just a much stronger candidate than she was, the first time many of us saw her for the first time back in 2019.
There were quite a few people who watched the DNC speech and were like, where's this Kamala been? And I always tell them, if you go to the vice president's Instagram account and just go back far enough, you will see that she's been at North Carolina A&T and Spelman and even non-HBCUs and states that have a lot of young women voters, and just giving speeches week after week on voting rights, on reproductive rights. And so she has had time to practice. The question is, this is a bigger conversation for another time, why that hasn't risen to the top of media coverage, and why much of what the vice president has been doing since being in the White House has just gone unknown or ignored. Were you going to say something, Governor?
Well, I'll let I'll
Sure.
I just want to, first of all, we need to also acknowledge, I am surprised, and very pleasantly surprised, but we need to also acknowledge the amazing decision that President Biden took, which is not customary, right? You don't give up. You don't give power up, and particularly a seat that is of great consequence. So I want to acknowledge that. The other thing is, the Kamala Harris that we're seeing has always been there, and the next panel you'll hear from Brett, who, as a senator, we have to recognize the complete record as a prosecutor, as a state attorney general, as a senator, as a vice president. It's a tough role to be a vice president. You have to balance it out. You don't want to, disturb what the president is doing, the team at the White House. It's complicated, right? Sometimes the teams work very, very well. Sometimes there's differences.
Sure.
So you have to tread carefully because at the end of the day, we all serve the president.
And you think she struck that balance pretty well?
She did. And now it's an open forum for her to truly shine. And as a woman of color, it's owning that light, owning that voice, which I think she's doing beautifully. Tonight is going to be very interesting because I also want to make sure that journalists and the media covers him with the same scrutiny as they're covering her.
Yeah, it's fair.
So, since I'm the conservative Republican up here, I'll try to give a little bit of balance. One thing I want you all to listen for tonight is that you're going to hear a lot of promises and we're going to spend this or we're going to do tax cuts. Listen to how many times our $33 trillion national debt is mentioned. Our national debt and how we're going to pay for these items is something worthy of discussion. So that's something I'm looking for tonight. Secondly, when it comes to Kamala Harris, I'm in a difficult position because I said I'm not going to vote for a convicted felon, and that eliminates one of the people on that platform. And so, Kamala has reached out and said, move toward the middle. The question is, has she just done that for political purposes, or is there a level of sincerity and commitment to get that done? And I think that's a test for tonight. And finally, I just wanted to say, I think it's interesting. Donald, usually before you do a debate, you throw out things that sort of sets the stage for it. What has Donald Trump done in preparation for this debate? He's attacked ABC News, which lowers the expectation that if he does poorly, he gets to blame it on this evil media that's coming after him unfairly. Secondly, he's putting out on Truth Social, raising the specter of 2020 again. And I can't figure whether he's just a loose cannon or whether he's setting the stage for something he wants to say tonight, or baiting a question that might come so that he can reinforce it with his own base. Those are a couple things I'm watching for.
And I want to hear what you all are watching for. We know that the Vice President published her issues and policies on her website, I believe Sunday or Monday. She received a lot of criticism previously about not having that out earlier. So people will be going into the debate, if they look it up, having more of an idea about what it is she wants to do. Are there some things that you all are looking to hear her say?
I think her answer on fracking is going to be critical, perhaps the most critical moment. And the degree, obviously, she teased it. She talked a little bit about it in the CNN interview. But the evolution of her position on that issue, I think, is going to be critical for the most critical state, Pennsylvania. That's one. And I think the other thing I'm listening to is, she really seemed to ignite a movement among younger people during the latter half of the summer. I've been studying younger people for a quarter century now, and to me, it felt like this combination of early 07, 08 Obama with the resilience and the determination of Parkland. So I'm hoping that she can empower not just younger people, but Americans across the spectrum who want to see a better America and be a part of that. And that's what I'm hoping for her to do as well.
Awesome.
We're a day shy from 9/11. And I think that's also, at least what I'm looking at, I'm looking for both what's the conversation on the national security side, but shameless plug for some of the study groups that you probably are seeing, and Brett is going to be speaking in the next panel. But this interplay between our economic health and inclusive and equitable economic growth, and how that pertains to our national security as well. Those are the interplays of, we have to do it all, and that's the reality of it. The government can't pick and choose what it prioritizes. At the end of the day, being the President of the United States means tackling some of the most challenging issues. What is that temperament? How is she going to ensure that the structure of government is working, as well as giving life to some of the most challenging issues that we have, whether it's fracking, whether it's looking at our economic health overall.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Absolutely.
That's a reality, yeah.
Great. I want to hear from you all. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions before our commercial break. And there'll be no commercials. But we have mics on both sides down on the first floor. And so If you have a question, please let your question actually be a question, and with a question mark. We would love for you to come and share your name and your affiliation with Harvard and who your question's for.
Hi, I'm Yasha. I'm with the Harvard Extension School. And as someone from a non-traditional background, I've noticed that this election is including a number of people from non-traditional backgrounds running for very high-level office positions. We're now seeing a presidential candidate who didn't attend a university like here, and a vice presidential candidate who came from working-class background as well. So I'm kind of curious about this new alignment that's occurring in our dual-party system, where now there seems to be a certain sense of alignment, both on like an economic level and at a bipartisan level about how we're treating various different fundamental opinions about how our economy works, essentially. Sort of like a certain acceptance of welfare of sorts or extended social benefits and whatnot. So how do you view that kind of like alignment change that's occurring now in both parties over the past decade?
I'll take first of all, thank you for the question. Let me also maybe give it a twist, because what I was hearing was more the alignment on a commitment towards equity. What I was hearing was the changes that we're seeing in how we approach both the economy and including people from all walks of life. And you've heard President Biden talk about it, as well as now Kamala Harris also embodying what that is. And I think that is the strength of America, both that diversity and the fact that we can provide opportunities, and that's why her economic plan is called an opportunity economy, to make sure that we give voices to everyone in this country. You know, we are here in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I also speak about Ottumwa, Iowa, and Wenatchee, Washington, and the Hopi tribe, the places that perhaps none of you have visited or have heard about, but that are equally as important to make sure that this country really moves forward. So that's how I was interpreting the question. Maybe it didn't answer it completely, but I did want to underscore how important the equity piece is.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Hi, my name is Harry Park, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School studying public policy. You've mentioned how when you came back to the administration, how everything was kind of decimated, especially in the Commerce Department. But I've also read some of the books written by the officials from the Trump administration who have demonstrated their frustration of how when they came into power and when they saw the government structure, everything was very inefficient, everything had to be reformed, so they had to go through some changes in the government. So on one hand, some people say that the government isn't looking as it should be, but on the other hand, some people are saying that the government needs to be changed. So what do you think is the normal shape or the norm of the government should be, and how can you tell whether it is under a reformation or whether or somebody's basically screwing up the government?
So let me contextualize. When I said it was decimated, it's because government is about people. It's the talents that we can attract and retain. My comment regarding commerce is NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. You can't go on monster.com to get an oceanographer. You can't go necessarily census, a statistician, a demographer. These are really highly skilled roles. And what I saw was many individuals in those roles when I was there previously had decided to leave. And we can't run a government if we don't have that talent. Should government be reformed? It's a constant, it has to be reformed. We change as a society. So government has to keep up with that pace. And it's very hard to do. So I think the answer to that question is it's in the middle. But we have to make sure that we attract and retain the best talent to work in public service. Yeah.
Part of the challenge is we're dealing with two parties who have fundamentally different ideas about what government is and how it should operate. And so that pendulum swing that you all saw when we went from Obama to Trump to Biden is partly related to that. Yeah. Yeah,
Let me just add on that point. That's a very great question. And I served as head of the DEA. I was part of the reorganization of the Department of Homeland Security, largest government reorganization since the Pentagon was created. And I know how hard those public servants work. I know how dedicated they are and how important they are to the functioning of our democracy, our government, our supply chain, our security. Now, you balance all of that with the reality of the people in Iowa and New Hampshire and Indiana and Michigan, particularly on the conservative side, that there's a reason that Vivek Ramaswamy said we ought to abolish the FBI. He said we ought to reduce federal employment by like 75%. I mean, ridiculous numbers, but people are responding to that. And so there is a need to reform the federal government, but to do it in a way that preserves and recognizes the importance of the civil servant that serves our country. So I just wanted to balance it out with there's a lot of frustration out there with the power of the federal government that can infringe upon freedom. And we've seen that from both a liberal and a conservative standpoint.
Awesome. We'll take one more question. Sure.
Hello, I'm an MPP student at HKS. I had a question for the governor. So looking at the current Republican Party, we've seen an increasing divide relating to U.S. foreign aid to allies like Ukraine. So one of the defining issues of the primary was J.D. Vance, for instance, being a bit more critical of U.S. foreign aid given domestic economic pressure. And then obviously traditional like Nikki Haley, Mitch McConnell, individuals like these being pretty supportive of continuing that aid into a next administration. So my question for you is what you think that divide will play out if Trump were to win the election. Do you think the legislative branch, given majority of senators and congressmen have been supportive of this aid, would that continue, or how do you feel that question shaking out personally?
Well, believe Trump whenever he says he wants to withdraw the influence of the United States of America abroad. I mean, he really does mean what he says. When he says he wants to increase the tariffs, he does want to do that. I think the question would be if you have a a House or Senate, whether they're Republican or Democrat, the question of whether Republicans would stand up to a Trump in his presidency to continue to support Ukraine and to continue to support our allies in NATO. I think that would be the question. And that is, to me, something we've got to watch tonight. Whenever Donald Trump says he can end the Middle East war in one day, he can end, the Ukraine war. I mean, he's got to, I hope the questioners will say, what is the specific? What's the plan? I don't know whether you get it or not, but you've got to test really where they're coming from in a foreign policy standpoint. I've made the case that Trump wants to withdraw the United States. I think that is pretty clear. And its leadership makes a difference, and it shapes America's thinking. And so young people, listen carefully and advocate for what you think the right role of America is.
Awesome. Well, I am so glad you all could join us and share your thoughts about what we all are looking forward to on this historic night. And we'll be following up with you all, I'm sure. Later on, please come to their study groups, their office hours, if you have questions that you didn't get to ask this evening. And if we could give them an applause for joining us, I'd appreciate that. Take a brief break for about 5 to 10 minutes. There's food behind these curtains, so enjoy, and we'll see you soon.
We're going to do a quick picture.
Okay. everyone. Going to get this show started again. I would appreciate if we could put an end to our conversations as we seek to continue the program. So I don't know how to do this be any more than I'm currently doing it without being rude. So I'm going to try not to be rude. So we would love for you all to enjoy the rest of this programming. One of the best ways for everyone to enjoy it is if we talk and you all save your conversations for after the debate. So what we're going to do right now, please stay in line if you want to get snacks. I was in grad school here. I know how important free food is. I am getting snacks right after this finishes. But if you can wait quietly and listen quietly, we want to get going. This second group is going to be as insightful as our first. We're going to bring on Brett Rosenberg. She's a foreign policy expert, an alum of the college, veteran of the White House. She started her political career working for Kamala Harris when she was in the Senate. She's also worked in the Biden administration. We're also going to have Betsy Ankney. She's a political strategist with more than 15 years of campaign experience, and most recently was the campaign manager for Nikki Haley's presidential campaign. And lastly, we're going to have John Anzalone. He's been in the polling business for more than 30 years, also an expert in messaging strategy. He's done polling for the last 4 presidential races, countless gubernatorial, Senate, and House races, and we're going to bring them to the stage right now. Please join us in welcoming our panelists to the stage. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I would love to hear, what are you all looking to hear tonight that you haven't heard from either candidate? What's a topic or issue that you feel like they need to address that hasn't broken through the media cycle yet?
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah. So I think the stakes are much higher for Kamala Harris tonight. I think that we've seen that Trump is pretty much a known quantity. We've seen that voters overwhelmingly say that they feel like they need to hear more from Kamala Harris than Trump. I think in the New York Times poll, it was roughly 30% of voters said they needed to hear more from Harris, and only like 7% said they needed to hear more from Trump. So I think that Harris has a much higher bar because of that laughter. People kind of know what they're getting with Trump, and I think that Harris has more to prove. She is not as well known, and I think that people really have questions about where she is on policy. And I think that the Trump team has done a good job in the lead up of really trying to expose the fact that she has not answered questions about policy and pushing her further to the left. Voters overwhelmingly see her as more liberal. I think people said that she is too liberal and less say that Trump is too conservative. And so I think that she really has a high bar, and she needs to prove to voters that she does have a plan, she does have policies, and she's going to need to answer a lot of questions about her record and kind of try to bring herself more to the middle to attract those voters.
So I agree and disagree. But first off, I think we got to remember one thing. It's actually not individual policies or proof points. Those are going to be important, but it's the message. And if people come away, a guy named Joel Bennison, who did the polling with me with Barack Obama, he said, presidential campaigns are about the future. And if you come away with Kamala Harris being the future candidate, then she's going to have a win that night. And I think that becomes really important. And I think that there's kind of 3 things that she needs to probably really drive. I agree with people want to know what's she going to do as president. Like, think about this right now. There's a somewhere out in Las Vegas or Wisconsin, there's dial groups on both sides, right? So there's a group like this, and they have dials, and the Republicans are doing it, and the Democrats are doing it. And they like something that Trump says, they put it high. When they don't like it, they put it low. Same thing with Harris. And what you're going to want to, I think, for Harris is that when she talks about the future, I would love to see a word cloud where she said the word future 20 times. The future of the economy should, how can the future of the economy be about you? And the future of the economy being innovative manufacturing and bringing, et cetera, and talk about the future of your individual rights with reproductive rights and being able to read books that you want, the future about democracy, et cetera. And so who is going to be the future candidate, right? And you talk about that she has more at stake. I actually think he has at more stake because one of the goals of Kamala Harris is to ignite the PTSD that America went through when Trump was president. And he has been a little rattled by Kamala Harris the last 2 months. There's only one candidate with momentum who seems to have a great narrative about the economy and the contrast in this election. And there's one candidate who's kind of been meandering around in his rallies. All of a sudden, Kamala Harris's rallies look like Trump's in 16, and his look like a meandering guy who can't quite get it together. So I actually think his bar is pretty high just to get his act together, and whether or not his behavior or bad behavior comes out, which again will be a problem because the PTSD igniting, there's an amnesia right now about Donald Trump.
And Axios today reported. I want to get to this before you, to piggyback on your point. Axios reported today that some of our team was speaking with some of his insiders, and they're just hoping he can hold it together and not say anything misogynistic or racist. And I just thought about how low the bar is.
Isn't that a low bar, though? It
Well,
might
but
be
I
really
don't- I don't-
hard to
I
meet,
actually-
but it's a low bar.
I hate to dominate, like 70%, when it was Joe Biden and Trump, 70% of America didn't want this choice, right? There's one candidate who got out, which means there's one candidate of that 70% who's still there. So he has plenty to prove. He has plenty to prove. And he's been the guy kind of, again, whose mental stability is, if you ask this question now, it's him. His age, his mental stability, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that he has a lot to prove that he can be presidential.
Right.
And that is a high bar for him.
Brett, what are you looking to hear in terms of them issues-wise tonight?
So maybe even before we get to issues-wise, because I wish debates were purely about the issues. That would be awesome, or even about the issues at all sometimes. But thinking about, on the first panel, you were talking about how powerful her DNC speech was, and people were saying, where has that Kamala been? And I, as you mentioned, worked for Kamala Harris in her first year in the Senate. And a bunch of us from the Senate actually went to the DNC together. And we were all sitting in the bleachers and watching 20,000 people cheer for her. And we were looking at each other, and our first thought was, wow, they all like her. Whoa. But our second thought was, this sounds like the Kamala Harris that we have known for a long time. And I think she has just gotten much more comfortable with her story, her performance. She's not Obama, right? I think people wanted her to be a new Obama. She's not. She's Kamala Harris. And I think the more she can come out and just be Kamala Harris, I think people are responding to that.
No, she very much has, in interviews, has talked about how, her aides have talked about how she hasn't always wanted to share her personal story. And people connect, to your point, with personal stories sometimes way more than policy issues. We were just finding out that one of the reasons she decided to be a prosecutor is because one of her best friends in high school was sexually assaulted by her father. But that didn't break through in 2019. Do you have any idea why you think she's breaking through this year in ways that she wasn't 4 years ago? People are connecting with her now?
It's a good question. I think some of it is her own, comfort with telling the story, with being herself. And she is a serious person. She's a fundamentally serious person. And she is running against a fundamentally unserious man. And I think that is connecting with people. And when she gets out there, and I hope tonight, she will talk about the issues with facility. She is smart. And that is the type of thing that I think people just want someone they know is looking out for them. When we were in the Senate, she used to talk about a bucket of issues she called the 3 a.m. issues. She would say, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're worried about, does my family have enough to eat? Do we have enough money to send the kids to the school they want to go to. These are the issues that keep you up at 3 a.m., and it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. So those are the issues I want to be focused on as a senator. And I think that she's not using that frame as much anymore, but that's clearly what she's trying to drive for with, as Alejandra talked about, her opportunity economy and things like that. Yeah.
Betsy, lots of people are surprised that Harris is the nominee. I would argue that one of the people who is not surprised is Nikki Haley. As someone who followed her campaign and covered it quite a bit, she very frequently pointed towards this day perhaps happening. Is that fair and is that accurate, and are you surprised?
Yes. No, I think that's absolutely correct. It's funny. A year ago in August, we were heading into the presidential primary debates, which Trump did not participate in. But we all the candidates had to sign a pledge for the RNC saying, you'd support the eventual nominee against President Joe Biden. Nikki Haley, on her pledge, actually crossed out Joe Biden and wrote Kamala Harris. So she very much saw this coming. I actually feel like a lot of people early on, when she talked about how she didn't think that Biden was ultimately going to be the nominee, sort of, thought that she was crazy. But she very much always felt that Biden was not going to be the nominee, that it was going to be Kamala Harris. And she also said repeatedly that the first party that puts aside their 80-year-old candidate was the party who's going to win. So she has been proven right on a lot of things so far. We will see if that one comes to bear as well. But I think that, as I think Governor Hutchinson mentioned, Trump clearly doesn't like the fact that he was running against Biden and Harris is now the nominee. I think he is very much adjusting to that, and we'll see how that plays out tonight. But I do just want to follow up on one thing that John said on the change candidate.
Hey, I'm really loving Nikki Haley right now, so I don't know where you're going, but go ahead.
Well, we could talk about that all night. But it is so interesting because you have the current vice president and the former president. And both of them are trying to run on a mantle of change. And I think that we've seen that Biden is not very popular. His approval rating is like a net 17 points underwater. And so Harris does have to both take credit for some of the positive things, distance herself from the bad, and be that mantle of change. Right. And generationally, she is that mantle of change. But it is a very interesting and unprecedented dynamic that you have.
So I actually, this is an interesting point. I think that there's a difference between change and the future, right? Because again, Harris is very much, if she gets it right, about the future, he's about the past. He was about change, and people voted for him in 2016 at the very end because, they were both risks, and he became the change agent. And what we would always see in focus groups where we get people in there and we get talking to them was, he says crazy, this is 16, he says crazy things, he says things that makes me uncomfortable, but when he becomes president, he'll become presidential. And guess what? He didn't become presidential. And so he wasn't also a change agent. Hence, someone even older than him, Joe Biden, could do it by doing what? 80% of our ads in 2020 were policy. They were just talking about what Joe Biden would do as president, his COVID plan, his, bringing the supply chain back. I mean, nothing sexy. And I actually think that would be really important for Kamala Harris. I'd love for her to get in the weeds on policy tonight, because what we find out in all the past presidential races I've done, and when you talk to real people, is that they just want to know what you're going to do as president, right? And they really don't want you talking about the other person. That gets in the way. So I would love for her to get in the weeds about, about any policy, about housing, about climate, whatever it may be, about economic opportunity, about supply chain, because I think that's what people are looking for. And she'll do the contrast. She'll ignite the PTSD in her own way, and I think she will have an opportunity to talk about values in a way that we have not had in a long time because of Trump.
I think a real challenge for candidates, and we saw this in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, is sometimes when you do talk about your opponent and their character and your concerns with them, in addition to policy, it's just that the policy part doesn't always break through. It's not very sexy, and it doesn't go viral, and it's not easy to tweet. And so her challenge will be pushing back on criticism, saying you didn't talk about policy. She'll say I did.
Eugene, I would love for all the talking heads at the end of the night when you're at the CNN panel that has way too many people, they say, gosh, she just talks so, what a snoozer. Because guess what, folks, I hate to burst your bubble, we're not real people, right? I mean, that's not who she's talking to. She's talking to independents under 50 with non-college educated voters, mostly white and disproportionately female, right? She has to make a connection with people who aren't particularly like us, but who they just want to know what she does. And even if she goes on and on about policy, whether they're even getting the proof points in really digesting them, they'll think, hey man, she really was on, she really talked about, issues, and that's what they want to hear.
Betsy, I wanted to ask you this. The verdict is out on how good of a pick J.D. Vance has been. To be charitable, how differently do you think this race will look if Nikki Haley were the VP candidate right now?
So that's interesting. I do think that there is so much emphasis placed by the press on a VP pick. And I think that ultimately, and John, you may or may not agree with what you've seen in polling, ultimately people are going to pick the top of the ticket. They are going to base their decision on the top of the ticket. And I think that the VP candidate has to sort of pass a couple of bars. Number one, in the event that something happens, are they able to step into that role? I think that, we saw what happened with Sarah Palin. I think that was obviously a huge issue for McCain in 2008. I also think you have to look at, are they going to do anything to balance the ticket? Candidates often try to bring someone in who balances them, either from an ideological standpoint, from a temperament standpoint, from a geographic standpoint. I also think that sometimes you just want someone who can carry your message and be a little bit of an attack dog. And I think that to that end, J.D. Vance has been an effective VP pick for the Trump campaign. I also think that, at the end of the day, you're picking your governing partner. And I think that the same could be said about Kamala Harris. There was a lot of questions on, should she pick like a Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, who would be a smart pick in a lot of ways, but ultimately she was more comfortable with Tim Walz for a variety of reasons. So, look, I think that obviously, I think that Nikki Haley would be the best candidate to be at the top of the ticket. That is why I wanted to work for her and ran her campaign. And I do think that she does bring a lot to the table. But at the end of the day, this race is about the top of the ticket. The J.D. Vance-Tim Walz debate is going to be a very interesting evening, and for a lot of reasons. But I think that, Trump is always going to sort of do what he wants to do. I think that conventional wisdom is that Vance did not bring some of the things to the table that Nikki Haley did, but he has been an attack dog. He has largely been on message. He has certainly had some comments from his past involving childless cat ladies come back to haunt him. But I think that for what Trump wanted in that moment, I think Vance largely has served him pretty well, even if he doesn't necessarily bring people into the fold.
John, I wanted to ask you, you know this from polling, how important are debates? In the media, they're very important to us. And ratings matter, and, they're large panels, so we tried to break up our panel to make it a little easier for you all to digest. But to voters and people watching, how many people actually leave debates going, I am going to do this now?
So, we clearly had the most historic debate in history. And I recommend you Google the top 5 gaffes or whatever in debates, because there were really big, Gerald Ford was president before before you were born. And he said the Soviet Union didn't dominate Eastern Europe. And that was kind of a big deal, and it probably gave Carter a little edge. And so the fact that we just had a historic one, and the fact that Kamala Harris is in some ways new to the American people, it's going to be really important. And it's going to be even more interesting in some ways. Are we going to have a second debate? If someone has a really good debate and someone has a really bad debate, will the other feel like they need to go and have another debate? And so this is kind of, right? This is like, this is a test of whether we actually have another debate. And guess what? America wants a debate. But, you know, again, I think that we know that there's just a sliver of swing voters out there, you know? And so I would also be talking to expansion groups. I'd be interested to hear, Betsy, like for our expansion groups, it's young people and it's old people. It's bookends. Like, you know, when you have a tight race and 2020 was won by 45,000 votes in 3 states, in 2016 it was won by 75,000 in 3 states, guess what? Like, you need everyone, all right? There's not one group that's more important than the other group. So where are your groups that you can expand? And for us, John Della Volpe will tell you, like, what was the percentage? 53% of young people voted in 2020. Like, if you can just expand that to 60% is huge. Seniors, which Democrats have done really well with because of the issues of the Biden administration, like insulin and negotiating with Medicare, et cetera, and Trump's not their type of guy, can we expand with that universe a little bit? So that's kind of what I would be, again, looking at and focusing about what's there important. And I would say for young people, I mean, if you're like my kids from 20 to 31, like, it's also not just about that day. Like, you're gonna, maybe you'll watch it, but you'll also be watching it on social media, and the next day may blow up on certain things that you push out on social media. So we no longer just have a 90-minute debate. We have a 2-day debate, and I think that that's really something that the campaigns have to understand.
Indeed. Brett, I really wanted to hear you talk about if you had any ideas about how to get foreign policy to cut through in a debate, right? I mean, there's polling after polling that says that it doesn't rank in the highest of concerns, but we do know that some of the very influential demographics that will determine this election, including young people, including voters on the right who may be more isolationist, will have strong views on foreign policy and are looking to these candidates to address their concerns. What do you think could be said by candidates that help voters realize how important foreign policy is?
Yeah, I think this is a problem beyond just debates, right? We don't talk about foreign policy in the media every day unless it's a huge conflagration, right? I think a lot of people in America probably didn't know where Gaza was before October 7th. And that's a huge problem for our democracy. It's especially huge when we think about who's going to be the president, because the president has so much power over foreign policy as compared to other areas of policy. And so they're going to have to do a lot more educating, both outside of the debate, but within the debate as well. We're probably not going to get to the brass tacks on all sorts of issues, but I think we're going to see other elements in play in the way that they talk about foreign policy. So, for example, Donald Trump has brought his racist and sexist attacks onto Kamala Harris when talking about her as being a potential commander-in-chief, because he has said no other world leaders would take her seriously. So one of Kamala Harris's jobs will be to say, actually, I'm ready on day one. I would be coming in as the president with actually the most foreign policy experience in the last many, other than Joe Biden, because she has traveled to 21 countries, met with 150 world leaders, right? Like, she's actually quite seasoned. She served on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And that's not necessarily about policy itself, but it's about temperament and experience and someone that people can trust. I would also love if the moderators really did push people on policy and said, okay, you've both made top-line statements about these issues. How are you going to do it? How are you going to get there? Because I just think the American people deserve that. I also think we'll see one candidate is able to answer those questions and the other probably isn't, which I would be cool with. Yeah.
I want to open this conversation up to you all. There are 2 mics on each side, as you all recall. And if you have any questions, please share your name and your affiliation with Harvard and who your question is directed towards.
Awesome. Hi, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Rohit Kataria, and I'm a first-year master's student here at the Kennedy School. My question is for Betsy. I am curious, it's sort of a 2-part question, but if Donald Trump loses the presidential election this year, 1, do you think he will run in 2028? And 2, if he does not, who do you think becomes the new leader of the Republican Party does J.D. Vance go down with Trump, so to speak, or does Nikki Haley sort of emerge as this new leader in the GOP?
So that is a great question. And I think that, if Trump is not successful, I think that the Republican Party will have a lot of soul searching to do. We have lost a lot of elections since 2016. We lost the House, we lost the Senate. We will see what not only the top of the ticket looks like in 2024, but also what does the Senate map look like? This is the most offensive Senate map for Republicans for the rest of the decade. Do we end up taking back the Senate? Is it by a seat or two, or do we do better? So I think that if we are not successful in this election, number one, I think that, we saw what happened in 2020. I think that there's already, some rumblings of election integrity being questioned. I think that people are sort of more on guard about that this time. I think that people are, both in the states and in the party as a whole, are kind of more prepared for those conversations, whereas in 2020, I think that it kind of took some people off guard. But I think looking ahead, we will have a lot of soul searching to do. After 2012, there was a, big project that was undertaken called the Growth and Opportunity Project that outlined a number of things that the Republican Party should do to be successful after that loss in 2012. I can tell you that a lot of those things were just put on the shelf and were not enacted. So I think that we will have to look at where we did well, where we did not, what the real problems in the party are. And I think that there are some things from a policy standpoint. I think that there are also some things from a tone and temperament standpoint that we need to look at. And I think that it will be an open question as to whether or not, Trump does run again. I mean, who knows? I think a lot of people didn't think that he was going to run this time around, and here we are. Whether or not, J.D. Vance is sort of the heir apparent if that happens. I think if he loses, that becomes much tougher. But I do think that there are some serious sort of family conversations that will need to happen. And I am hopeful, obviously, that, the Republican Party can get back to governing as conservatives when it comes to fiscal policy. We can get back to governing in terms of peace through strength. And we can get back to being a party that welcomes people into our fold instead of pushing them away. And so I think that that is going to be something that a lot of us will need to focus on. And it's not just going to take the people in the party, but it's going to take, everyone, the people in this room, everyone to kind of say, okay, how do we do better? Because we haven't been doing well.
And can I just add that I was Hillary Clinton's pollster as well, so I've kind of been through this. When you have a big loss, voters get incredibly pragmatic. I mean, when you get your butt kicked, you get really pragmatic. And you think, and I'm not talking about party leaders, I'm talking about voters, primary voters. I mean, I remember doing focus groups in Iowa in 2019, and there was, Warren voters and Mayor Pete voters and Sanders voters who they, still love their candidate, but they would say, but I'm voting for Joe Biden because he can beat Trump. So they really, again, if you're a primary voter, you're like a special species of voter, right? It's a really small universe of voter who votes in primaries. So you're high information and you get incredibly pragmatic about your winning theory, and you may put your candidate aside to vote for someone if they can then bring back the White House.
The one thing I will say to that, though, and I totally love and appreciate that, but Republican primary voters have not done that.
Right.
I mean, I think after 2020, we obviously did not do that. And again, I think that comes to a lot of people still question what happened in the election in 2020. And they say, oh, well, he didn't actually lose. So there are a lot of tough conversations that need to be had. And maybe, after multiple elections, that, people will get a little more pragmatic about that. But, we will see.
Yeah, no, it's the nature of the media world, but I've actually given quite a bit of thought already to the 2026 midterm elections, just to see, because of the primary, exactly what you're talking about. We saw that happen in 2022. The GOP voters would get these very extreme candidates to the finish line, and that could not make it through a general. And so that's going to have to stop if something is expected to change in the GOP. Yeah. More questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Sahar. I'm a student at the business school. Given that, as you mentioned earlier, it's not always about issues, but we have, a candidate that has a history of being quite temperamental, can throw off discussions. To what extent, historically, and perhaps between these two candidates, is it possible for someone to bounce back from a debate? How defining are debates in the larger scheme of a presidential election?
Well, the best example is 2012. Barack Obama had a terrible first debate, and it just surprised his people. I was doing dial tests. I remember, listening to it, and he bounced back, right? And so it can happen. But the dynamics, I think, with this is that if one of them has a bad debate, I don't think there'll be a second debate.
Right.
I think that'll be the problem. I think if Trump wins it or in his head or loses it, there probably won't be a second debate, because I think he believes he can just take it to the American people because he's the smartest guy in the room. So traditionally, I think you can recover from it, quite frankly. But I think that this is unique because we've had one candidate who's literally been the nominee for 2 months, and one who, again, everyone knows, but needs to be reminded of his toxicity. Again, that's Harris's job.
This entire competition right now is really challenging what we've previously believed about what's required and necessary to win the White House. I mean, even in terms of length of a campaign.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the sort of interesting kind of sausage-making things about all of this is kind of the debate about debates, right? And that happens.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. And that happens in a primary, it happens in a general. I mean, as I mentioned, Trump did not participate in a single primary debate on our side. We tried really hard to get him to do it, and he would not. And I think this time around, they sort of bypass the traditional presidential debate committee and sort of did it on their own between the two campaigns, negotiating with the networks. And so it's a much different process that has happened in the past, because normally you do have sort of a set, entity kind of laying all of this out and saying, we are going to have 2 debates in these states, in these locations, on these dates. And then, they get in the weeds on mics muted or unmuted, all of that stuff. But that has not happened this time, so it's much more of kind of the Wild West.
It's all about who shows up, which of the Donald Trump shows up, if the Kamala Harris interrogator, if you Google her congressional interrogations, not just of Brett Kavanaugh, but of business leaders, et cetera, she's a prosecutor, she was a trial attorney. If that Kamala Harris turns up, it could be really fun.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I want to thank all of you all for turning up to this event. It's been a pleasure. Please give our panelists a round of applause. Awesome. It is technically 8 minutes to the start of the debate, but please feel free to get some snacks and come back here, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.